And there's been a lot going on inside that White House, regardless of how you feel about politics. It's important to know what's up. So just enjoy. Watch and or listen while we tackle tough and sometimes taboo topics filmed live over drinks. This platform allows us to articulate our thoughts and challenge our beliefs. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy. All right, we are live. This is SipTalk, episode 269. My name is Justin DiGiulio, joined by James, the Boswell, philosopher, philanthropist, phlebotomist, philatelist, a man of many PHs, full of phlegm, although he seems to be a pretty healthy guy tonight. We are live also on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, Twitch, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're watching us live, you can join if you have something to add to the conversation tonight. We are talking about Trump 88 days into the presidency. James is going to break it down from a liberal perspective as to what Trump is doing well. And this is SipTalk live from SipTalk headquarters, the internet. James, how's it hanging?
Yeah, happy and healthy down here in South Carolina. Although, I don't know. I'm starting to sour on Charleston. I'm looking for exit strategies. I just don't want to sell my house.
I think you're starting to sour on the United States of America, my friend.
Well, that's also true, but Charleston is offering less and less for me. So moving within the United States would be far easier than moving somewhere abroad. So I might have to look at those options first.
So I'm happy to be having a drink here. I've got a nice glass of scotch, and I'm flanked by 3 additional cans of beer here because this sounds like it's going to be a liberal tirade against Trump. Not that I'm for Trump. I just feel like you're going to do the majority of the talking here.
I'm going to stay away from a lot of the biggest liberal points and talk about the stuff that's going to affect everybody.
Well, in current events outside of our topic today, anything going on we should know about? You getting ready for Easter? You decorated? You got some eggs out there?
Oh yeah, the whole house is all in pastels.
All right, very nice.
And all the children will be coming over to my house for an Easter egg hunt at 7 a.m. on Sunday.
Oh yeah, it sounds wonderful. He's being sarcastic. If you don't know James. All right, so I guess we got a cool bar trivia question this week. You have to wait till the end for that. We have last episode's bar trivia question answer, so that'll be a good one too. They are lined up on our website. Visit SipTalkPodcast.com to get an answer in there to win a prize, like a SipTalk pint glass or shot glass or dog T-shirt. So I got our notes here. We got a long list of basically what you had predicted would happen, right? Do you want to kind of introduce the?
Well, yeah. Before the election, I went on a long tirade about all the reasons why I thought it would be bad to elect Trump to a second term, and I went through that list and I pulled out the parts that I got right, because some of the stuff that I don't think I really got anything wrong, but there were some things that I pointed out that were more like aspects to Trump's character, and decided that those weren't really going to be relevant because those are just saying why this would be a bad person to pick, but not on a policy level. So I want to talk about the real world impacts that we have seen in the last 3 months.
And look, I have not been following politics much at all over the last really year or so. And I used to be day in and day out news radio, reading news articles all day long. And I'm living a happier life. I listen to music when I get ready in the morning. It's a good life. But I believe that I'm just going to be kind of the more centrist opinion, neither too far left nor too far right, just kind of reacting and commenting on these predictions and the impending world doom.
Well, let's start with what arguably was the biggest reason for people choosing to vote for Trump this time, which would be inflation and the economy, right?
Well, I think a lot of people looked at the state of the world in 2024 and said this is lousier than it was when Trump was president, right? And said, well, Trump was doing a better job. and prices were very inflated. We saw lots of prices go way up while Biden was president. So people thought Trump had this economic plan to stimulate the economy, to reduce inflation, to make America more independent industrially,
So
and
a lot of
create
that is
more
what they
jobs.
tried to sell on the campaign trail, and arguably, well, I'd say inarguably, it worked. At the
And
time,
that definitely worked because he won the election.
right? Yeah, that's why I'm saying inarguably it worked. As if he had lost the election, I would say it didn't work. But so like a lot of the things you said were pitches that were made on the campaign trail, and a lot of people going into the 2024 election did feel that Biden could have done better on the economy, and I would argue that Biden actually did pretty well on the economy given the circumstances, but I don't want to litigate that because I want to talk about what's happening right now. Because when you talk about inflation and getting things the cost of things to come down, we're not seeing that. And let's talk first about tariffs, which first of all, if you haven't heard this before, you should be listening now. Tariffs are not a tax on the country that is sending goods to us. If China, for example, has Chinese companies that are sending goods that they want to sell in the United States, and we impose a 100% tariff, or I think it's 245 now, China isn't paying a penny of that. The person who is importing the goods, the person who is paying China for whatever is coming in, they are paying that tax when it comes through customs. And so they're paying that tax to the United States government, but it's a US company that's importing that's paying that tax. And so where that money goes is to the US government, and it's reflected in the price of whatever that good is being higher to the next person
Well,
down the line.
the company buying the good, right? Their cost goes up. End of story.
Yes.
And if you are a business and your cost of goods goes up, you must increase your prices.
Or lose money.
Well, you can only. I mean, these are big tariffs.
Yes.
So, or lose money, or go out of business.
Or stop importing from the country that's subject to the tariffs. So if you can buy something for, let's say, $1 per unit from China, and now there's 100% tariff, so now they cost you $2 per unit. Maybe you go to the country that was selling them for $1.25 or $1.50 a unit. But you're never going to your costs are going up whether you're having to find a replacement importer or you're just going to pay the tariff on the country that's affected. But no matter what the case is, your costs go up and you pass those on to consumers because you have a profit margin that you need to hit. And if your costs go up, then the price has to go up to keep the profit margin the same. And so ultimately, all of these tariffs are a tax on American companies and American citizens. They are not a tax at all on any foreign country. No
Well,
foreign country is paying us anything.
let me also just note something from a business owner's perspective. Most businesses buying goods and reselling them, or buying goods and incorporating into their product and selling another product. Most of what we sell, the profit margins are relatively low, right? If they were that high, there'd be a lot of competition, and that would drive prices down, and then the profit margin would be low.
Yeah, except in very specialized industries, that's the case.
Well, exactly, but most industries, the profit margin is the vast majority of the economy is run by small profit margins. Sorry, go ahead. Just wanted that note out there.
Right. So when you're talking about trying to combat inflation, one of the worst things that you can possibly do, actually the worst thing you can possibly do, is raise the cost of goods. So the tariffs are not the way to fight inflation. Um, and when it comes to tariffs, like these have downstream effects. So like other countries don't like having their goods being tariffed, so they impose tariffs on us. And we've seen that happen with Canada and Mexico and China and probably a bunch of countries in the EU. I don't have a list off the top of my head. But
But there's a
that makes it
say
harder for
that,
American businesses to be able to sell their stuff internationally. So not only does we're paying more for these goods, at the same time we're limiting our ability to make money through trade internationally by selling our stuff. Now, the other thing that markets really, really like more than anything else is predictability and stability. And I'm talking on like a macro scale. But if you think about it On the micro scale, if you're a business owner and you're trying to make plans for how many people you're going to hire, or how much stuff you're going to buy for inventory, or how many units you're going to produce, etc., the more stable an environment you're in, the better you can make those plans and be able to predict like what kind of business you're going to have and what growth you experience. When things are volatile and you don't know what the rules are, you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to sell to a certain country, you're not able to expand, you're not able to market as aggressively. And so businesses in times of volatility will hold back on things like investment and hiring and production because
Also,
they
if
don't.
I'm an investor in that business, I'm going to hold off on investment or divest my interest in that company.
Right. And that's why, like when it was like a week ago, no, 2 weeks ago, when Trump announced Liberation Day and announced tariffs on like every country on Earth, including countries that don't have populations, and like the markets went completely down the tubes for like two
Was that,
straight days.
that was 2 Fridays ago.
Um, 2 Fridays ago was when he retracted some of the tariffs and the market spiked because they're like,
Hmm.
finally, like we're not going to have to pay these tariffs. But like the thing is that like when he announced the Canada and Mexico tariffs back in January, like he imposed them and then like over the weekend said, you know what, I'm going to do a 90-day pause. And he's kind of gone back and forth on this
Well, there's
all
an
the.
agreement. There's a unilateral agreement to do a 90-day pause from Mexico and Canada.
Well, Canada and Mexico would like a 90-day pause because 90 is better than zero, and the 90 days gives them a chance to see if they can get out of the tariffs entirely. But the point is, you have the president on one day saying, I'm going to be doing this, and there's no going back, and this is just what the policy is going to be. And then 2 or 3 days later saying, oh, well, we're going to do a pause, or it's going to
So
be,
look,
I'm going to
let me
exempt
give
a
you.
few
Let
things.
me just give you because this is we have a lot more topics to talk about, and this is a pretty clear and obvious one. But I think the goal. So if you were to look at this from the right wing perspective, the goal is to make America more independent and less reliant on other nations for our industrial needs and just our general goods. Um, and the goal is to make those goods more expensive for us, so we'll create them at home. Now, the way that that plays out is there will be a if it does play out, there'll be a huge spike immediately on the cost of goods. A lot of companies will probably go out of business. And for example, if you buy an iPhone for $1,100, that means the parts to make it cost a lot less. And in many cases, the early days of iPhone, they were subsidized. But if you're making that iPhone in rural China in factories where people live there, that cost to make it is pretty low. You're not going to get Americans to live over the course of miles and miles working 18-hour days assembling iPhones for anywhere near that cost. So
No,
my guess is if we just made iPhones from scratch in the United States, with our own, like, I don't know.
I saw one estimate, and
Yeah.
this is probably too high. But I
Uh,
saw one estimate that if you were to bring the entire supply chain for the iPhone into the United States and the iPhone were made 100% in the United States, the
I,
cost of an iPhone would be
Oh,
$30,000.
that's exactly the number I was thinking. That's literally because you have to think you're talking about the circuit boards, you're talking about the ore for the metals, and the rare metals and the battery metals,
And all the labor.
and the labor. But so effectively, and here's the issue with tariffs is that it is a tool. Okay, it is akin to like Thor's hammer, though, and that's not the way to kind of be directing. And look, I'm not against what Trump's trying to do. Actually, I think it's actually a good idea, but I just wouldn't be using Thor's hammer
Well,
to be
here's
doing
why
that.
it's a bad idea.
Well, what he's doing is he's manipulating economies through
No,
tariffs.
no, no. Here, like, because you said, and this is the good faith. This is the good faith approach to like interpreting his actions of saying like, well, we want to bring these jobs back to America and we want to bring this production back to America and everything else. But there are a number of things in the list. Like, the list is too long for me to go through of things that we cannot produce here.
Well, I mean,
And
talk about your metals, your rare
or
earth
like
metals,
so
and
rare earth metals and like here's a really simple one. Coffee.
yeah,
There's only
we
one
don't have
place
the
in the United
climate.
States that you can grow coffee. You know where it is?
Hawaii.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good guess. But yeah, we don't have
Right. So
the
it's
environment.
instead of fighting against like the fact that we're in a more globalized economy, what we should be doing is finding ways to work with the globalized economy and take advantage of it in every possible way. Because and this is a super basic theory of economics called comparative advantage, where if you have one country that does something well, but one other thing that's not done very well, and you've got another country that does that other thing well, then like you let the specialists do their thing. And so you can look at, for example, Taiwan, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. They've got factories there that can make certain types of chips that nowhere else in the world can do. Like the technology and the investment to make this level of like circuit boards exists only on Taiwan. Now, if the United States wanted to, they could probably, with years and years of research and billions of dollars of investment, get close to or exceed that. However, economically, that doesn't make much sense because you can let the investment that was already done somewhere else and just take advantage of the fact that they're already there and we pay them for that and we can spend our money in other areas.
Also,
It's
the way that pursuing technology like that works is that it would probably take us 8 to 12 years to get where they are now. And where do you think they will be in eight to
right.
12
And so
years?
instead of trying to fight against that and basically duplicate the work of others, it's you let the work of others stand on its own and they can profit from it. And you take advantage of that work and then focus on your own
But
thing
here's the
and
issue, though, is
specialize in
that
that.
humanity doesn't work very well together. Like it would be great if we could all just be friends and help each other out in that way that you're saying. But the downside is market manipulation and reliability in other countries that don't play well and can use things, can basically hold our hand behind our back because they have this going for them or that going for them. I'm not saying it's Taiwan, actually. I'm saying more so it would be China.
Well, and
But
to say that China is a good actor in the global economy is a flat out lie. And so I'm not opposed to us taking a more aggressive stance on to China, especially when it comes to like their human rights abuses and such. But the way to do it is not just a blanket tariff on everything that they do. That doesn't accomplish the goal,
well,
and
that's
it
what I
hurts the
said. It's
wrong
like
people.
it's like a Thor's hammer, right? It's the wrong tool
Well,
to be doing this.
it's you need a screwdriver, not a hammer.
I mean, yeah, I would say you need actually more like fine surgical tools, but
But let
whatever.
me go through this real quick. So, like,
Let's
when
move
it comes
forward
to
then.
Canada and Mexico and China and stuff, when it comes to these countries saying, you know what, if you're going to tariff us, then we're just not going to trade with you, and we're going to find other places to trade with. So, for example, like this country grows a lot of soybeans, right? China loves soybeans. They buy a crap load from us. Well, not anymore. You know where those contracts have been going? Brazil. Brazilian farmers are making out like bandits on this one because they're able to take all these contracts that used to go to us. Well, China's like, fine, we'll buy it from Brazil now.
Yeah.
Canada is boycotting basically all United States goods. There's no tourists coming from Canada or the EU or Mexico. Well, Mexico has less tourism to here, but like there's a tremendous amount of tourism that we're losing because countries are just saying you're treating our country terribly. Why would we go visit yours and pay money to stay in your hotels and eat at your restaurants? So
Yeah, well, it's not so far in the short term. Again, we're 88 days in, but so far it's not working out that well. I have not seen anything that's really come home and affected me yet. So
no, but a lot of these things take a lot longer than 3 months to fully realize. But you can see the effects in the stock market when Trump announces these tariffs. Like the Dow had its worst day since 2008, or it's like its worst 2 day stretch since 2008, where like 2 days in a row it was down like a combined total of like 13 or 14%, which is like that's economic disaster levels of losses. And it's because the markets know that if these tariffs implemented as they were debuted on Liberation Day, the markets know that it will crater the economy.
all right, let's move forward in this discussion.
All right, so very briefly, I want to talk about how Trump wants to fire Jerome Powell.
That's new news today.
It's not well.
Well,
It's both
I mean,
true
I
and
heard it
not.
today, and I
Because he has
try not
talked
to.
about how he doesn't like that the Fed hasn't been lowering rates more, and he's talked about how he would like to be able to replace Jerome Powell and want the power. It's that it's being brought up again today, and like having the Federal Reserve being independent is super important because when you give the executive branch control over the banking sector, you end up in a situation like Turkey.
Well, hang on. Before you explain Turkey, though, just remember that the banking sector is not one of the branches of government. It's independent,
Well, the Federal
and
Reserve it
and it's
controls
in
interest rates of what the government lends to banks.
and the yeah. I mean, the government basically handed over control of our currency 200 years ago. Is that about right? 200 years ago, like
Uh,
Alexander Hamilton creating the national bank, and it's a separate division. It's not one of the
yeah.
it's not legislative, not judicial. It's not the executive branch. It's not a branch of government at all.
Oh, it's a government agency, and I believe the appointments to it are handled by Congress.
Legislate. Okay, all right.
So I
Appointments.
guess it would
Yeah.
be ultimately under the branch of the legislative body, but the whole idea of it is like once the people are appointed to the Fed, so Congress approves them, and once they're appointed, they serve their terms and they cannot be fired for any reason besides like malfeasance, negligence, or criminality. Right?
All right. So
It's
where were you going with this? Go ahead.
well, is if Trump fires Jerome Powell and is given the power to install whoever he wants, he's going to install somebody that's going to just lower interest rates because that's what Trump wants to do. And if you lower interest rates in a high inflation environment, you get more inflation. And so you could end up in a situation like Turkey where inflation was at like 20, 30, 40, 50%. And the president told the central bank keep interest rates low, and that inflation was like 140%,
Yeah.
and their currency became useless.
It's just wild that like it's using a sledgehammer where that's not. I mean, yes, you're going to see a quick dramatic result, but it could get it away from you very quickly.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is if you lower interest rates in the very short term, it'll actually be good for the economy because you'll have more lending and borrowing and everything,
Yeah, more
but that'll
skill.
all blow up in your face very shortly.
Well, I mean, the more people, the more house you can afford, the more easy it is to buy a house, the higher the house prices get. Right? Like that's an easy one. And not, I don't even think you see it as fast with cars, but you see it faster with houses. And I think anybody who's tried to buy a house in the last 5 years has been like, holy shit, $600,000 for this 3-bedroom house on a quarter of an acre. What the fuck?
Yeah,
Like,
no, but apply in longer term. That's going to be the same with everything in the economy. But also, just like Jerome Powell, there are some legitimate criticisms of how of him being a little bit too slow to respond in 2021 and 2022 regarding inflation. But once they responded, they've actually done a really good job. And if you compare inflation rates in the United States to practically any other developed economy in the world, we did better by a lot.
well, look, as someone who's in real estate, I talk to people about interest rates a lot. And I talk about historic interest rates and where we are in this kind of 6% realm.
It's kind of
Uh,
middle of the road.
That's not bad. That's not bad. Ask anybody who bought a house in the 80s.
Early 80s, it was like 15%.
Yeah, I think I was about to say late 70s to 80s, but I think
Late 70s, I think it peaked at like 22 or 23.
yeah, I mean it got really high, and obviously houses were a lot cheaper back then, but interest rate is an interest rate. It's money that
Right.
you're borrowing and extending yourself and paying a huge interest rate. So, and I'm not saying that we're comparing 6 to 18 or 20%, but we're comparing 6 to 3%, which was a kind of blip in history of a very low interest rate. Uh,
Yeah, for about two years or so, 2 or 3 years, you could get that rate.
but historically, rates were nowhere ever near 2.7 to 3.5. Like, it's just,
No, like,
that's not a
dude,
real thing. So sorry you missed the boat and like free money basically, but
yeah,
six is
no, the
not
note on
bad.
my house is 3 1/8.
I mean that's great. But if you miss the boat, it doesn't mean you're screwed. It means it's still time to buy. Just you know, go ahead.
Yeah, and
Let's move
real
forward
quick,
here.
and I'm gonna circle back around to this, but like in terms of just like problems with the economy, is all these cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, like those affect poor people's ability to access basic services. And in some cases, poor people's ability, like if you're a retired person who lives primarily on Social Security, and like Social Security offices are closed because they're cutting all the employees in there, like, and you don't get your check, like that means you don't make rent for the month. That means you can't afford groceries. So it's going to
Well,
put a
you know
lot of
what?
people that were already in precarious economic positions in.
Listen, I listen to the news radio that I listen to is NPR, which is super liberal. And I have not heard of any of these stories where people have not gotten their Social Security check.
Hasn't happened yet.
And it's also my understanding that Social Security, uh, there, it is run basically the same way it's been run since the 60s. And they're trying to bring this up to date. They're trying to make some big changes so that it is a system that's well functioning moving forward, and that nobody's looking to end Social Security whatsoever.
That's not the case. Elon Musk is on record saying that like Social Security is a pyramid scheme that needs to be ended.
Yeah, I think the pyramid scheme to it needs to be ended. That it's
No, the
costing.
pyramid scheme to it is the fundamental design of it, which is that you have people that are working paying to the people that aren't working in the hopes that when they're retired, the people that are working will pay them.
And I think
That's what he's talking
what
about.
he's saying though, is you increasingly need more and more and more people paying in because it's becoming such a waste of money that the people that are getting the payouts, so much money is being lost. Instead of just like the bottom pay the top, right? The earners are paying the people that are retiring. What's going to happen when we have fewer people entering the workforce and the bottom of the pyramid is no longer wider than the base? So that needs to be ended. And I listened to him say that. And I also listened to him talk about it for like an hour a few weeks ago. And what he said made a lot of sense. He said the system, it can't continue as it is. We need to end it. Not the system. He's very much in favor of keeping Social Security around.
If you say the system can't continue as it is, we need to end it. That sounds to me
No,
like you're asking to end the system.
exactly. And that's what I'm saying is you're reading it too literally. If you listen to it in context, the context goes on to say we need to end the wasteful spending. We need to end the direction that it's going.
But there is no wasteful spending.
There's a lot of wasteful spending. It's run the same way that it was in the 1960s. It costs so much money to keep this system running. It's absolutely wasteful.
Well, you could argue that for people that are retired above a certain income level, say they have passive income from investments or they're still working, because like you can collect Social Security and still be working.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, hey, maybe we should revise the system so that if you have passive income above a certain amount, or you're still earning a paycheck above a certain amount, your Social Security benefits are reduced because this is supposed to be a program for people who need it. You could do that. You could also look at raising the cap on income that is taxed for Social Security, because like it's only your first 135,000, 140,000 that is taxed. So if you make $1 million a year, you're only paying Social Security tax on the first 140,000. So if you raise the cap, that all of a sudden frees up a lot more money to go in to pay the people that are retired.
Yeah, if
There
you
are a
are
lot of
making that,
solutions here
no,
besides blowing up the whole system.
well, but a lot of what you just said is literally what I listened to him say.
He hasn't proposed lifting the cap on Social Security
Well,
tax.
I didn't hear that, but a lot of the other things that you said, for example, just like people who make a lot of money not needing to receive Social Security. Somebody who's got millions of dollars doesn't really care for an $800 a month paycheck
Right.
or whatever
So,
Social Security is.
and there are some reforms that I think would be valid, but I haven't heard the reforms that I think would make the most sense. I have not heard proposed. But
All
let's
right,
move on.
before we move on, I want to bring up bar trivia from our last episode, and I will read that question to you. If you give me just a second. This had to do with gold coins, and the question was, which is worth more, a full pound of $10 solid gold coins or a half pound of $20 solid gold coins? Or are they worth the same? So a full pound of $10 solid gold coins or a half pound of $20 solid gold coins, or are they worth the same?
It depends on the spot price of gold.
So if you want, so the answer is, if you want to boil that down, or let's say melt that down, if you've got let me hit this question again. If you've got a pound of solid gold or you've got a half pound of solid gold, the pound is worth more.
Right, but let's imagine a scenario where gold is worth only $1 per pound, but the coins are printed as $10 per coin. So, like, if you've got more $10 coins than you do $20 coins, like more than double, then like you're going to be better off keeping the $10 coins because you have more of them. But if you're talking about in terms of pure weight, assuming that like the $10 coin has more gold in it than $10 worth of gold, then sure, the pound of gold is worth more than the half pound of gold.
Well, at surface value, you have a pound. So there's no number of count of coins. Okay. But let's say if you got $10 coins and you have double the amount that you do $20 coins,
Well, then they'd
it's
be
worth
worth the same.
Okay. However, so at your argument, they're worth the same. Okay. The other argument is that the pound of gold is more valuable than the half pound of gold.
Well, that's why I'm saying the spot price of gold here matters. Because if gold is worth only $1 per pound, which obviously it isn't, but let's just imagine that gold is worth only $1 per pound, then the $10 would be equal to the $20 pile because there's the same
They'd be
number
equal.
of
They'd
coins.
be equal. Yeah.
But if gold is worth way more than the face value of the
Face
coin that
value of
it's
the coin.
in,
Exactly.
then you melt down the coin and you take the raw metal.
Which is almost always the case.
Yes, but it didn't used to be.
Well, yeah. Speaking of, we were talking about national banking. All right, that was a bar trivia question. I got a cool one. I got a fun one. A little bit of a riddle that I've derived from another question I have. We'll tease that one at the end of the episode. Stay tuned. That one.
All right.
That one's good.
I want to run through this one quick.
All right.
So my other prediction was that Trump will purge the government of experts in nearly every field and replace them with political sycophants. So, like, you've got RFK Jr., who has no formal medical training whatsoever, in charge of the entire healthcare system in the United States. You've got Pete Hegseth, who has been credibly accused of sexual assault and binge drinking episodes, running the Department of Defense. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, who has credible ties to Russian intelligence, and you can look at Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth from like a month ago, where they accidentally invited in a reporter to a text chat of them planning an attack on Yemen, and like beyond it being incompetent that they don't even know who they're inviting into these chats, like the like it's a violation of the government records acts because the app that they're using, Signal, deletes its stuff after 90 days or something like that. And so any communications between government officials need to be kept, like whether they're classified or not.
So for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are not aware of this, because you don't listen to the news as often as we do, which for me is not much, but I am aware of this. There was a group text message chat, okay, with 8 or 9 people in it
on the app Signal.
On the app Signal, which not many people have heard of, but I guess if you're lucky enough to have
more
it,
people have heard of it now.
If you're lucky enough to have it, there's a higher probability than you might think of being put into a group chat with very powerful, high-level government officials planning a bomb attack on the other side of the world, and you just get to watch what's happening. And the funny thing was, I mean, I listened to the guy talk about it, and he's like, "Yeah, in the beginning, I just thought that I was kind of part of a gag. Like people were like, just put me in this to see if I would react and do anything. But as I watched it play out, and I kind of like checked some of the things that they were saying, it became very aware that it was real. And then when the events that they said they were about to happen actually happened, I realized these people in this chat were real. And the weirdest part was that there was 8 or 9 of them in this group. I've been in chat groups where there's hundreds of people where I just get dragged into a WhatsApp group. We're not talking like 200 people. We're talking
like
about
12.
8. We're talking about a very low number of very high profile government officials. And when you're in a group chat and you can see like the other people that are in there, you probably have them saved in your phone. And every once in a while, there's like 1 or 2 numbers that you don't have.
Yep.
James went on vacation a week ago and he put 18 people in a group chat, and 1 or 2 of them I knew who they were. The vast majority of them I didn't. But you would never be in a high level government chat with a bunch of numbers that weren't saved in your phone. You'd know who was in the group.
Right. Yeah. Like me sending pictures of what I was doing to people is not the same as planning like a bombing raid in Yemen. And I intentionally kept everybody secret from each other because I didn't want people to know who they were.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, well, I mean, that's just what happened at very high level government issue. Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, you can think about early on when Musk was sending emails encouraging like all federal workers to resign and stuff like that. And, like and you can look at like all the park rangers that were fired who were doing important jobs. And like this is something that polls well across the board is like everybody in this country likes our national parks.
Yeah, the part. I mean, look again. A lot of this was just done very fast, very broadly stroked, and look, I'm not against a lot of it. Actually, I just think it was done very poorly. So you're against a lot of this.
I'm
I'm
against a lot of it because
not
look,
against it. I just think it
I'm
has
not
been
going to
done
say
poorly.
that our government runs perfectly efficient and that there's not waste involved. But what I'm like, and like when Elon Musk talks about how like he's uncovered all this fraud, it's like okay, charge somebody with fraud. Like not a
Well, I
single
think
charge.
I think the argument against that would be it's just so baked into the system that people are just doing their job. People are
Well,
just
that's
doing their
not
job.
fraud then.
But what when people are spending $230 for a cup of coffee, right? And they're
But
buying, and they're
I don't
buying
think
thousands
that.
of cup of coffee in an office. It's because the price is so marked up, and the person signing off on it doesn't know that they're
But
being
but
overcharged in this way or
that's
that
not
way.
what's happening.
No, it is what's happening. There's a lot of money just disappearing on silly stuff, and what they're saying is we need to look at a lot of this with a fine tooth comb, and
Yeah, but
what we're
that's
gonna
not what they're doing.
and what they're doing is they're just broadly deleting things and then waiting for basically if you were to take and this is why Elon Musk thinks he can do this is you basically look at the source code for Twitter and you look at a bunch of shit and then you just delete it and see what happens. And if it's catastrophic, you just command V it
Right, but
back, and then you look at it a little bit more
yeah, but
deeply. And
first of all,
that's the
that's a
same technique that
terrible
he's
way to run
doing.
a company,
It, agreed,
and it's an
agreed.
even worse way to run a government.
I agree with you, but that's what they're doing, and
Right,
I
because
think we need a lot of
they're not
deleting to
hiring
happen.
competent people; they're hiring yes men.
But the thing is, competent people would take them 100 years to do this, and it's not going to happen that way. So, unfortunately, you need kind of oafy
No,
idiots to come in
no,
and do
no.
this.
You don't like the
Well, okay,
whole idea.
what's the alternative? Biden,
Well,
Kamala, they weren't going to do any of this. They weren't going to reform Social Security. They weren't going to look into government spending. They weren't going to. They would never have ended like the immense amount of money that the United
look,
States is spending.
what you're describing to me is, in my view, the amount of waste in the government is equivalent to a stubbed toe, and what they're doing is saying, "Well, let's amputate the foot."
No, but you seem to think that how the government's running is a stub toe. What I'm telling you is the right leg is completely rotted, and the
Yeah,
left
that's what
leg is
Elon Musk
starting,
says, and that's
and
not true.
and the left leg is starting to rot as well. I think if you surveyed the vast majority of Americans and you asked them how bad the state of the United States government was, they would tell you pretty damn bad.
Yeah, but I don't think that that's just because people think something is a way doesn't mean it is actually that way.
I mean, I think it is. Have you been like everything that the government runs, as far as my perspective, kind of in life is shit. Whether it's the state government or the city government or the federal government. I mean,
And I would
let
disagree.
me ask you a question. Would you rather walk into a United States post office, which I do generally a couple days a week, very nice post offices across Manhattan, and then I can walk and by the way, they're like I would say for every 8 light bulbs or light fixtures, most of them are just bashed out and broken. And I go to some in New Jersey as well. They're bashed out and broken. The place is all fucking decrepit, falling apart. I would say 1 out of 8 lights are even on in the light fixtures. There's usually a line and it takes forever. Okay. And then you walk into a FedEx or a UPS and it's bright and it's modern. They're selling other things like drinks and all this other stuff. And you walk in, you get service. They're happy to see you. I went into
So
a
you know what
FedEx
that's an
yesterday.
argument for?
Go ahead.
That's an argument for funding these places better.
Or maybe they're funded well enough. They just waste a lot of money.
I would have to dig into the accounting and see, which I'm never going to be able to do.
Well,
But I would say
neither
that
one of us. But
first
I
of
think
all,
that's the way that they're looking at it because they're saying
when
let's
the
start deleting
USPS
some of
has
the
a
funding and see
mandate
what falls apart.
to run what's an unprofitable service because they have to keep their costs, the costs that they can
It's
charge are
not
relatively
unprofitable because
fixed.
it's not unprofitable because they're not given enough money. Okay,
No,
they
no, no,
don't
no.
need. They shouldn't need government funding. They charge for their goods.
Right, but
FedEx,
think about it.
FedEx
Hold on.
charges for their goods too, and
Right, but
delivers a better service.
let me give you an example. Like 2 months ago, I had to ship a package to my mom, and I shipped it through UPS, and it was like a 5 or 6 pound package, and it cost like $105 to ship. Why? Because where my mom's address was, UPS considered remote, so they charged me like 50% more. Right?
It is remote.
It is,
It's on a mountain.
but
It's remote.
But UPS charged me like $105 for this thing, whereas USPS is not allowed to. That's like, so they have to deliver to every address in the United States, whether that address gets one piece of mail every month or 1,000 pieces of mail a day. They have to deliver to it, and so the place that gets 1,000 pieces of mail a day is probably profitable for the USPS. But if you ever drive out into the country in this country, you will see that there are millions of locations that the USPS is legally required to serve that are unprofitable
Well, but who's to say the USPS couldn't just charge more for that location?
because they're not allowed to.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Who's the one saying that?
What I'm saying is that this is a service that the government provides, and the government doesn't need to make a profit. Sometimes providing services to people that lose money is a service to the country that we're all willing to pay.
You know what I would like? I would like the USPS to make a little bit of a profit. That way, they have a bank account that works. So when the light bulbs go out in their post office, they can go buy another light bulb. They don't have to write for federal funding to go buy light bulbs 2.5 years later when they replace every single light in the place. Yeah. And then slowly over the next 3 years, lights go out and shit gets broken.
I don't think that the government needs to make a profit on things. And I'll give you an example here. I don't have kids. I live in a city, and I pay $1,500 a year in property taxes that go mostly to the schools. That's money I will never see again, and I don't directly benefit from. And I still am okay paying it because I know that it's for the betterment of society. Is those school taxes make it so that the people that are in my city are more educated, and that's worth it to me. And when it comes to the USPS providing mail service to people that live 30 miles away from the nearest other house, that's a societal benefit. And USPS losing money so that it can provide affordable mailing options to every person in this country is worth them losing money.
But you sent this UPS?
Yeah, I sent this UPS.
Why didn't you send it? Why didn't you send it USPS for less?
Because I'm a dumbass. Moving on.
Let's move on. You got a lot to cover. I'm going to have my bar trivia.
So I want to talk about, and I'm going to have to race through this because I told you this was going to take longer than I thought. The Trump administration would trample on the human rights of many U.S. citizens. So I'm going to, like, banning transgender people from serving in the military, forcing the IRS to share taxpayer data with ICE, which was previously forbidden. And we can talk about the arrests of people like Mohammed Khalil, Ramesa Ozturk, Kilmar Obrego Garcia, which is the one I want to talk about the most.
By the way, I've heard about some of these arrests and people being deported. And on NPR, they're like, yeah, so this supposed gang member was recently deported. And, they asked his family, was he a gang member? And they said he wasn't. All right. Not the most believable. Like, I know people who have been gang members in New York, and if you ask their family, they're like the sweetest kids. Just throw that out there. Like, all right. Not a very you don't got me. You don't have me on that one.
So let's talk about Kilmar Obrego Garcia.
Right, and none of these names ring a bell. Actually, so maybe Mohammed Khalil does.
Mohammed Khalil was a student at Columbia University that participated in protests against Columbia University. Supporting, like, the main goal that they wanted was Columbia University to divest any of its endowment from companies that were Israeli based.
Yeah, stupid protest. It doesn't stand a chance. But some of these guys were getting pretty violent and pretty crazy on Columbia campus. I don't know if you heard about this. It's like a mile from my office.
I'm aware, but
these protests are getting way out of hand. So what did this numbnuts do?
All he did was participate in the protests and speak at the protests. There's no evidence that he was like breaking into buildings or anything else. He was just a leader of the people that were in favor of these protests.
If he just got on a stage and spoke, that's one thing. But if this guy was making a scene, which is what most speakers tend to do.
Okay, but
I mean, I
Like,
don't know if you've seen the protests in New York. I don't think this guy like got in the stage, like a TED talk,
well,
walked over there with a microphone, and people listened to him. I imagine it was a little more ruckus than that. I don't know if you've seen any protests, but
so speaking at a protest is 100% protected by the First Amendment.
okay. But shouting and making a scene and causing chaos is there's a thin line there. Right.
Yeah, but
Again,
that's not what he's
you're not on a
accused of doing.
stage. You're not on a stage at a TED talk.
Right, but that's not what he's accused of
if
doing.
you're inciting
He
violence
is
and things
only
like that,
accused of just being a figurehead of the protest. And the same thing for Ramesa Ozturk is she just wrote like an op-ed in like her university's newspaper supporting Palestinian freedom. And again, First Amendment stuff. And she was like basically kidnapped off the streets by like in an unmarked van by ICE officers that weren't that were like wearing face coverings and hoodies and not wearing like any badges or anything else. And those two are both being held, I believe, in Louisiana. But the one that really strikes me the most, like those two are bad, but this one is the worst, which is Killer Roberto Garcia is an El Salvadoran man living in Maryland for like the last 10 years or so who had like legal protected status in the United States, which meant that he went to courts to to be here legally. And in the court hearings that he went through to get this legal status, like he had to go through interviews with customs and immigration, he had to go through interviews with the judge, and like the judge found that he met the legal requirements to be temporarily protected legal status. And if you look at his history, he actually fled El Salvador because his family was subject to gang violence. So he wasn't part of a gang, he was a victim of gangs. And so he was living
well,
here above board legally. He got swept up with all the other Venezuelans that they arrested a month and a half ago. And the government even admits that he wasn't somebody that they meant to pick up. He ends up getting shipped off to El Salvador,
and
and
they won't let him go.
they will not let him
Yeah.
go.
So
They will not
here's,
even give him a chance to
well,
like fight this
my
legally.
my initial rebuttal when you were talking until it hit me and I remembered who this was when you said, well, he wasn't part of a gang. He was, on the receiving end of gang violence. My thought was, who's generally on the receiving end of gang violence, right, James?
Not just
Other
other gangs.
other gangs.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
But I'm just saying, I'm letting you know where my brain went, and then it occurred to me who this guy was, and then yeah, El Salvador is not letting him go, which is
And here's what I would say
which I'm
is
not sure why. And I didn't hear exactly
I'll tell
why.
you why, but I want to get to the why in a second. My whole thing is
So you got
like
so you got so you got three people here.
those are the three people, but like there's of the like 270 Venezuelans that were picked up in the same plane load that Garcia was on, like only like 15 to 20% of them have a criminal record. Of those, most of them are minor violations, like maybe shoplifting or like a traffic ticket. And so my whole point is like, first of all, if we're arresting people in this country, they should be kept in this country. They should be in United States facilities where we have oversight and control. And second, none of these people have been afforded due process. None of these people have been given an opportunity to go to court and argue their case.
Well, the due process is what we as Americans have the right to, right?
Everybody is subject to due process. It's not a U.S. citizen thing. It's anybody that is in the United States is allowed due process.
All right.
Is that's a function of our justice system.
Well, I mean,
Where
I don't know if you remember me saying on this podcast that if what Trump says is going to happen and what ice, if there are ice raids, it's going to be like fucking purge night.
well, and we're seeing that
And
start.
and
And
we
the,
are
the answer
seeing a
is
little
to,
bit of it.
the answer to your question as to why they're not letting him go is this is to set up precedent. Is they don't want to be in a position where anybody that they send away could potentially challenge anything, because then the administration is going to have to fight every single one of these battles in court, and they don't want to do that.
No,
They
no,
want to
no.
have the power to just send anybody they choose out of this country with no review
No,
and
I'm
no
saying El
recourse.
Salvador is not letting him go.
El Salvador would let him go if we told them to.
Well,
You know, because first of all, we're paying El Salvador $6 million a year to house these people, If we were to say we're going to stop paying you guys, then El Salvador is going to say, then pick up these people and bring them back to your country. So El Salvador isn't doing it because Trump is telling them not to. Like,
All right, let's
and
move on here.
well,
Let's
and
move on.
also,
This is, I
like,
mean, this is messy. I'll agree with you. This is messy.
it's not messy.
But
You've got DOJ lawyers that are on the verge of being held in criminal contempt by the court for lying to judges and disobeying judicial orders.
well, I mean, what happened was the planes took off while this was being heard, while the case was being heard, and they were told to turn around, and the channels of communication never followed through and told the planes to turn around, or maybe the planes knew and just continued to go. But there are people in that chain of command who are now being held in contempt of the court.
Right, and the whole point of all of this is that they don't want to be beholden to the courts, so that they can trample on civil rights. So that, like, and Trump has even said, like, 2 days ago, that he wants to start doing this same thing to U.S. citizens. And so if the U.S. government, I'm serious, this is on tape, of Trump saying we want to start doing this with homegrowns, which means U.S. citizens. And
Well,
if you can have a U.S. citizen that is arrested by the government and put on a plane and sent to El Salvador before they can even talk to a lawyer or go to court, then that means that, in theory, you or I could disappear tomorrow and be stuck in an El Salvadoran prison with nothing, with no out.
well, he's mostly talking about anchor babies and anchor people. He's not.
No. He's talking about U.S. citizens that commit crimes.
That commit crimes.
But again, even if you commit a crime, you should be able to go to court and plead your case. Everybody has that.
What he's using, they're using this like late, I think, 1700s law.
That's the Alien Enemies Law, and that applies
exactly.
to Venezuelans. But he's looking to expand this to any U.S. criminal that he doesn't want in the United States. He wants to be able to ship to El Salvador.
They're basing this off precedents over 250 years ago.
Well, the Alien Enemies Law wouldn't apply to a U.S. citizen that they're trying to do this to.
I'm just saying that's what they're basing it on. All right, we got limited time left. So
real quick, him trying to strong arm private universities into purging students that exercise their free speech rights, and that's the whole fight between him and Harvard right now. It's the fight between him and Columbia and a number of others. I mean, here's two others. Like, ICE arrests a 16-year-old girl on her way to school without a warrant. U.S.-born man who was held in Florida by ICE. And those are just two articles from today. And we've got, like, again,
hold on, wait a second. Just call this one out again. Look, I have a critical ear. When I hear U.S.-born man, to me, that it seems like maybe he's like, he was born to like somebody who was here on vacation, and I understand that's our law, but it's a little tricky there. Okay?
It's not tricky.
When I hear U.S. born, if
you're born in the United States, you're a United States citizen. That's the way the 14th Amendment works.
I understand, but they didn't say citizen deported. They said U.S. born man. So to me, it just sounds a little dicey. That's all.
All right. Anyways, real quick, he doesn't respect the democracy or Constitution. So pardoning every single one of the January 6th convictions, him firing a whole bunch of inspectors general that are tasked with government oversight, him ordering the DOJ to dismiss the case against Eric Adams. We've already talked about shipping people to El Salvador with no due process. We just touched on the birthright citizenship fight.
I think you're out. I think it was your last note.
Yeah, which means that we're right on time, and I had to rush through some of these.
Well, no, I'm glad you got to rattle them off, because I mean we've talked about a lot of stuff. You made a lot of points, prior to this episode. But let me ask you this, and maybe this is how we'll conclude. When Trump was first elected, in his first 100 days, the vast majority of the people that I knew in very liberal New York City, a dark, deep dark blue place on the map.
Yeah.
It was almost like it rained for 100 days. Okay. This time around, there's been people I've been avoiding conversations with since Trump was reelected, because I did not want to have to hear their liberal political shitting on Trump just in my ear. I didn't want to talk to them because I didn't want to talk about Trump. I didn't want to talk about how much they hate Trump. And this is what surprised me, is that in New York City, It's a very liberal place. Some of my more liberal friends are like, yeah, just curious where this is going to go. Like, I hate Trump, but I'm not against it this time. Like, things were getting out of hand. The liberals are really getting out of hand, and it's got to. I'm not happy with how he's doing it, but it's got to, it's got to end somewhere. And this liberal shit is just getting a little too crazy. And that's what I'm seeing and hearing. So it says a lot about the state of our country. If and this is what I said, this is
Everything
why
he's
Trump is
doing is
going
going
to
to make
win.
things worse.
It may. It may.
is.
I mean, the
It
tariffs. I think
actively
the
is.
tariffs are like a really funny thing. I think the tariffs are a very funny tool to be using.
Well, I think it's because Trump fundamentally misunderstands how tariffs work. But
I don't even think it's him. I think it's his whole cabinet. I think it's the what was it? The 2025 playbook. What was that called?
Project
Project
2025.
2025. Like that was not written by him. It was written for him.
Yeah.
And again, I think with obviously major agenda in mind. All right, shit, I got to hit the bar trivia question before we move forward. All right, so an Irishman, Joe Malone, relocated his wife and 5 children to the Adirondacks several years ago. The youngest, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, are the sweetest, and they were looked after by the middle child. Given the 2 eldest teenagers, very strong, they're helping to build the mountain homestead with their father. One night in a pub in town, after a few beers, Joe mentioned that half of his children are boys. He wasn't lying. Can you explain this in logical terms? Oh, all right. Read it to you one more time. Before we run out of time. An Irishman, Joe Malone, relocated his wife and 5 children to the Adirondacks several years ago. The youngest, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, are the sweetest and looked after by the middle child. Given the 2 eldest are teenagers, they are strong and helping build the mountain homestead with their father. One night in the pub, after a few beers, Joe mentioned that half of his children are boys. He wasn't lying. Can you explain this in logical terms? Stay tuned to episode 270 to hear the answer. Thank you for joining SipTalk Podcast. Visit siptalkpodcast.com. Buy us a drink. See you next time. Adios. All right, you made it to the end. Let me know what you think. Are we too political these days? Not political enough? Share your thoughts in the comments.